What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Martian MMA podcast. I am the Martian, also known as John, coming at you this week to discuss the UFC Fight Night card going down in Louisville, Kentucky this Saturday, headlined by Jared Cannonier versus Nassourdine-Imavov in a great middleweight fight in the main event. And top to bottom, a pretty solid Fight Night card. We tend to see the UFC bring out a little bit better of a lineup for these fight nights in front of an audience, which I do think they did here. So some pretty compelling fights, a lot of good matchups to present good betting opportunities, which is really all we can ask for, you know. Maybe not the most star-studded lineup top to bottom, but when you match a lot of these fighters up, I think you get pretty interesting betting lines on some of these fights. So I'm excited to talk about most of these this week. And last week, we're coming off a UFC 302. Which was a pretty consensus bad card. It really didn't deliver too many good fights. A lot of decisions, a lot of favorites won. We had 12 fights, 10 favorites won, 1 underdog. And then the Kopylov-Almeida fight kind of ended up as a pick'em towards close, but Kopylov was a dog most of the week. So let's just say 2 dogs, 1 out of 10. I thought it was semi-good week of predictions for me. I didn't really plant the flag on too many bets, but I did have, some winners come through. Alan Perez, Jake Matthews, the goes the distance in the Kopylov-Almeida fight, the Strickland fight to go along, Strickland by decision, and the over 1.5 in the main event as well. Islam got the sub much later than I expected. I mean, great fight. I mean, I really think that main event saved the entire card. If that fight was, an early Islam submission and it wasn't intriguing, I think that would have been a really top to bottom bad card. But the main event was incredible, quite frankly. I thought Islam looked great on the feet. Dustin did better on the ground than he did versus a lot of opponents. He didn't make a lot of the mistakes he did going to the guillotine. He didn't panic like he did versus Khabib. He was much more composed and ended up being a really competitive fight. One judge had it 2-2 heading it into the 5th. 2 judges had it 3-1 Islam. I don't have a problem with 3-1 Islam, him winning the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, but definitely think Dustin won the 4th. And man, it just really surprised me. It was a great fight. I don't think it's one of the greatest fights of all time, but man, I think it was a really good fight. One of the fights of the year, and really rescued the entire card, so good on those guys. But let's hope we get a little more underdogs this week. Hopefully we get some more competitive fights, some better finishes. Last week only had 2 finishes, and they were both submissions. No, 3 finishes, all submissions. But I'm excited for this week's card. So we're going to start things off at the bottom of the card in the women's strawweight division, where we have Puja Tomar taking on Amanda. The odds for this one, courtesy of Bet Online, which is where I always quote the odds from. We have Amanda minus 375 to Tomar coming back at plus 310. So full disclosure, did not do research into this fight. Tomar, an 8-4 regional Indian woman coming into the UFC. Hot take, I don't think that she has the most potential, just considering the region where she's coming from. So I just didn't even bother looking into her. I'm not interested in taking her as a big underdog. I'm not interested in laying juice on Amanda, obviously. And the goes the distance in this fight is minus 135. And I really think that when women's fights goes the distance in the minus 100 range of some sort, I think most of the time they end up being bait. And what I mean by that is they give you an enticing price and you're thinking, oh, minus 135, under 60% for women to go the distance, and then there end up being a finish in the fight. So I wouldn't knock anybody for playing goes the distance, but I guess Amanda's going to win. I don't really know. Didn't do research into that one, so let's just go ahead and move on. We are in the bantamweight division now. Cody Stamann, Taylor-Lapilus taking on this fight in the bantamweight division. We have Lapilus minus 268. Cody Stamann coming back plus 228. I like Cody Stamann here. I think this was a pretty consensus underdog for some of the guys that I've discussed fights with. We're just thinking, Lapilus, he's a very medium tempo striker, right? This guy likes to fight at distance. He likes it at a little bit of a lower tempo, and he doesn't really put up the most amount of strikes. He spends a lot of time moving backwards, and he can be taken down and put on bottom. We saw that a lot in the Bashrat fight. We saw it even a little bit in the Calvin-Logren fight. He got taken down and lost a round on bottom there. So it just seems like if this fight stays on the feet, I think Lapilus, that favors him. but not by some gigantic margin. Cody Stammen's boxing is legit, and he has been growing more confident in his striking lately. But I do imagine that Lapilus edges the striking when it's on the feet. But then if Cody Stammen, rocks up with his wrestling shoes here, man, he has potential to win this fight convincingly. And he hasn't wrestled too reliably in a lot of his fights lately, but when he first got into the UFC and really, had his best run of his career, he was mixing in his wrestling a lot. Arguably has a win over Song Yadong back in the day in a controversial fight that ended in a draw. But if Stammen, worst case, it stays on the feet, I think he looks like a slight to median underdog. I don't even think he's going to look like a plus 230 underdog when it's on the feet. I think he makes it more competitive than that. And if he can hit his takedowns here and keep top position and do that for multiple rounds, he has potential to look like the favorite as the plus 230 underdog. So I like Cody Stammen here for, really a medium bet, probably a little more than a unit, because man, I really think that if he comes with the right game plan and wrestles a lot here, he could win the fight rather easily. So I think this line is pretty wild. Not sure why the market is loving Lapilus so much, but I'm happy to take a dog shot on Cody Stammen for my first dog bet of the card. We are moving on to the women's strawweight division. Eduardo Moura taking on Denise Gomes. Odds for this one have Moura minus 185, Gomes plus 160. So Moura's pretty untested, right? She's taken down and submitted pretty much every single one of her opponents. She's only gone into round 3 one time. That was a split decision against an opponent with a 12-14 record. And that was just about a little less than 2 years ago. So typical MMA fighter that just destroys a lot of their opponents early on, and we have no idea how their cardio is going to look later in a fight. So you got to imagine Moura is going to want to take the fight to the floor and probably can take down Denise Gomes, who doesn't really have great takedown defense. She got taken down by Angela Hill 5 times. I believe Loma Lookbunmi took her down 4 times as well. So she is definitely a bad wrestler. But you got to think that if she can sustain the early storm here and maybe make it out of the first round, not get submitted in the first half of the fight, the second half of the fight might favor her. And Gomes should have the striking advantage from the jump. So if Moura shoots some sloppy takedowns and Gomes puts some hands on her, we know Gomes cracks. She has a few knockouts in the women's division. So I think it's definitely dog or pass, man. 65% for Moura is not a bet I could get behind. She's far too one-dimensional. She's far too untested. Her strength of schedule is not good. And I just think that if she doesn't get the fight to the floor here, she's, kind of fucked. So definitely Gomes or pass. I haven't locked in a bet myself. And always just, be aware of that live bet here, guys. Just wait to see how Gomes deals with the takedowns, and maybe lie better after you see how she does. If she gets taken down immediately and she jumps up to a bigger underdog, maybe you wait and wait to lie better until she starts showing signs of life. And it goes the distance. Same theory here. It's plus money for the GTD here. I'm staying away. Moore could finish her on the ground. Gomes could finish her on the feet. I think this one could definitely finish. So no interest on, no flags planted on either of the first 2 women's fights of the night. But we do have one more coming up here soon. Next fight is in the bantamweight division as well. Daniel Marcos taking on John Sexy Mexi Castaneda. Odds for this one have Marcos minus 119, Castaneda minus 101. Competitive fight here, really good matchup, 2-way action. I took Castaneda a few weeks ago at plus 145 for a good medium-sized bet, and man, this is a fight I think really favors him. Marcos is undefeated. He has a controversial win off of Davy Grant in one of his most recent fights. Had a controversial draw versus Aori in his last fight in a no contest it was. But I mean, he was dominating that fight. Marcos to me is just a decent above average striker, right? This guy is not an offensive grappler. We don't really know how good his defensive grappling is. And I don't think he's fought the best of competition. And we've been seeing these Peruvian guys drop like flies. I mean, we've been seeing some bad stuff out of these Peruvian fighters lately. And Marcos might be the next one on that list. Because if this fight stays standing, I think I honestly still favor Castaneda, who is a slick southpaw striker who knows how to mix up his boxing and his kicks really well. Is a really good boxer, in my opinion. And I just think he's equipped to deal with the striking attacks of Marcos, who mixes in a lot of leg kicks, has some good knees. But, man, I'm just not impressed by Marcos. The guys he's outstruck so far, Simon Oliveira, Alichi Lang, we saw him struggle with Davy Grant. I just don't think this guy's that good. And the market is overrating him with that undefeated record of his. And then if Castaneda rocks up with some takedowns, which he should because he's hit 3 takedowns in 3 fights in a row now, I think Castaneda could, do good work with that. I just don't imagine Marcos is a good wrestler. Peruvian guys, we've seen them get submitted a few times lately. Claudio Puelles, Luis Puello. I mean, these guys are just straight up bad grapplers. There's another one too, Kevin Borjas. And I just think that Castaneda has all the upside here, man. I really think Castaneda should be the favorite. Even at even money, I think he's worth a bet. So if you missed that early plus money that I got, I think Castaneda is still worth it, and he's one of my more confident spots. I'm riding with John here. I'm going with my fellow John with the Sexy Mexi. People call me Sexy Mexi from time to time as well, I got a nice tan going in the summer, and, people are always mistaking me. They're like, hola, Juan. And I was like, no, I'm John. I speak English, My Spanish is no bueno. So enough about that one. We're moving on to a long-awaited rematch. I mean, people have been asking for this fight for years. They're like, oh my God, the first fight was so great. When are Andrea Lee and Montana De La Rosa going to rematch? Now's the time, guys. Now's the time. Flyweight division, Andrea Lee, Montana De La Rosa. Odds for this one have Lee favored -160, Montana dog +140. And man, both these women have 9 losses in MMA. Rough stuff. And they both look horrible lately, quite frankly. They both look like they have one foot out the door. And I'm going to go with the opposite happening of the first fight, guys. If you listen to the podcast often, my theory is that rematches in MMA often go the opposite way because when the fighter wins the fight, I tend to think they get a little complacent. They say, hey, I won the first fight. I'm going to do what I did last time. While the loser of the fight has to really go back to the drawing board and try to adapt their game plan. And I think that's what Montana does here. And, the striking of the fight definitely favors Andrea Lee, just like we saw in the first fight. She busted De La Rosa up in that fight. And you're going to want to see Montana look to take this fight to the floor like she did in the first fight. She got a lot of takedowns in the first fight, but Andrea Lee was able to work her way back up to the feet very often in that fight, to the point where MDLR wasn't really able to get any offense going. But with Lee looking worse and worse, looking older, worse on bottom, worse in the grappling exchanges, I think that there's higher potential for Montana to actually maintain those takedowns this time. So I'm just going with the grappler here, guys. I mean, with 2 older women at the end of their careers who aren't looking so good lately, I'm going with the grappler because I think she just has the clearer margins to win the fight. When Montana is on top, I think that she's going to be the one in control and winning the fight in the eyes of the judges, while Lee winning the fight correlates to her striking, and we just know these judges are very inconsistent, especially when it comes to women's striking fights, especially in fucking Kentucky, where who knows how the judges are going to look, man. It's anybody's guess. So that's going to be enough about that one. I got MDLR there. I think she's the side and probably worth a bet at plus money. And we're moving on to the bantamweight division. Brad Katona, Jesse Butler. Odds for this one have Katona massive favorite -625. Coming back to Butler plus 425. He's going to be Cutler after this fight because this guy's getting cut. Butler's a complete role player, has no business being in the UFC, and they brought him in on short notice to fight Jim Miller. He got absolutely slaughtered, 20-second knockout, and they really shouldn't even have given this guy another opportunity, man. I get that he did a favor for the UFC coming in on short notice, but this guy has no business being in the UFC. He stinks. He's just maybe, I wouldn't even say above average grappler. I would say he's a below average grappler who's not even really consistently winning fights on the regionals, guys. I mean, he has 4 losses on the regionals before he even got to the UFC. So I don't know, man. I think that the question of this fight is Brad Katona going to get his first UFC finish? Because Brad has been in the UFC for 6 fights, has never been finished, and even on the Ultimate Fighter, he wasn't finishing guys. And it seems like he actually might have a chance to get his first finish here. I think it's probably skewing more towards the sub because his strikes are so harmless that I think it's probably going to be a sub for Katona, if anything. But the prices really aren't too intriguing. They have sub at 450, maybe looking at Brad Katona sub around 2, round 3. I'm not sure if that is out yet on FanDuel, but I would just be looking to fade Katona getting the finish in the first round. Katona will take his time. He will pick Butler apart. He will make his reads, and then he'll probably drown him in the second or third rounds. I'm far from confident in him actually getting the finish because he is just largely weak and non-aggressive. But it's not a bad stab if you want to take that here. The ITD got bet a little bit. Katona ITD down to plus 160. People are taking that. But with how bad Butler is, and even though Katona is not really great at anything, he is serviceable everywhere. He's fought good competition. He is a significantly better fighter than Jesse Butler. So there's a great chance he finishes here, and I hope he does. I hope he gets his first UFC finish, and I'll maybe end up on that sub 2-3 line for Brad Katona depending on the price. We're moving on. Welterweight division. The first male fight not in the bantamweight division on the card. We had 3 women's fights and 3 bantamweight fights to kick off the card. Now we're moving to welterweight, where we have Charles Radtke taking on Carlos Prates. Odds for this one have Prates as the favorite, minus 230, coming back with Radtke plus 195. Another good matchup here, man. And I'm going with the American Radtke as my side and bet in this fight. And Prates' offense is legit, man. His striking, his straight punches, his knees, his kicks, they're all really good. He's a tricky southpaw to deal with. He's quick. He's got some power behind his shots. But he doesn't really offensively grapple. He has been taken down at fights and times. The Mitch Ramirez fight we saw briefly. And I just think that if Radtke can rock up with the right game plan to close the distance, to not give Prates that long kicking range, to string together some boxing combinations, to put in some output, and maybe even mix in some takedowns here, he could definitely win this fight. I mean, we saw in the Trevin Giles fight that Prates' boxing defense is not good. He does a lot of leaning back, and he's just pretty defensively void. And if Charles is able to pressure and to not get scared by those kicks and those knees and the straight punches of Prates and close the distance, then Radtke can string together some combinations and put some paws on Prates, because Radtke's combinations in his boxing are legit. And we saw it in the last fight where he destroyed Urbina in that fight with his jab and his right hand, the left hook. I mean, his boxing looked really sharp. And Radtke actually has a lot of jiu-jitsu experience, man. This guy's a black belt. He's competed a lot in jiu-jitsu. I wouldn't say his wrestling is good per se, but he has gone to it a lot and win fights. And before some of his recent fights, he wrestled very often in his fights. So I would say Prates is the rightful favorite. Maybe minus 130, 150 would be correct. But I'm going with my boy Radtke here, man. I think he can fight behind the right game plan. He seems tough to me. He did get finished with body shots versus Justin Montalvo, which is going to be a concern here with the body kicks and the knees of Prates. But I'm going with Radtke here at 2-1, easy bet for me. Probably around 1 unit for me on Radtke. And we move on. Last prelim, lightweight division in a really good matchup here. Thiago Moises, Ludovic Klein. Odds for this one have Klein slight favorite, minus 127. Thiago Moises coming back at plus 107. One of the closest line fights on the card, and for good reason. And man, what a good fight here. I think this one probably deserves to be on the main card and instead of some of these other bum fights coming up in the next 3 fights. But I digress. Both guys coming off of wins, pretty dominant stuff over opponents that didn't deserve to be in there with them, but they treated them accordingly, And on the feet here, I think the Klein definitely has the advantage. He's the quicker, more diverse striker of the two. Moises' striking is very basic. It's very fundamental. He throws some straight punches and, some leg kicks, but he keeps it conservative. He has good technique, but he just doesn't really ever let loose on the feet. So if anyone is, letting loose and putting up volume and landing impactful strikes, I definitely think it's going to be on the side of Ludovic Klein. However, the grappling upside has to be on Thiago Moises. I mean, the guy is a high-level black belt who uses his wrestling and grappling to win fights pretty often. I don't think his wrestling is that great, and he does struggle to set up the takedowns at times with the strikes. The Michael Johnson fight's a classic example of that. He's just shooting from too far away without setting anything up, and he eventually just gets sprawled on. And that's been a problem with him throughout several of his fights. But I do think Klein will be there to be taken down. We have seen Klein taken down before. He got out-grappled by Nate Landwehr and submitted. He even got taken down and held on bottom in the third round versus Jai Herbert. So that's a horrible look. And with Klein also having a record of kind of slowing down a little bit in the third round, and with him, his questions of being on bottom, there's no way I would lay juice on Klein with those concerns. But early on, I do think the speed and the striking of Klein will give Moises trouble, and I do expect Klein to win the first round. So I'll be looking to live bet Thiago here. Thiago money line, after he deals with that speed a little bit, maybe he kicks it in a second gear. I do think Moises is a slow starter. And then I haven't checked the line yet, but I imagine the sub 2-3 for Moises is going to be an intriguing price. Let's check it out on FanDuel here. So $750 for sub 2-3, not terrific odds. I would have liked it to be over 10-1, but yeah, Moises sub anytime $390. I do think that's being slightly overvalued. I mean, we cannot forget how good of a grappler this guy is once he gets the fight to the floor. So I think I'm probably just going to stick with looking for live on Moises. They have, what do they have? Klein KO1, $850 for Klein KO1. I mean, this guy is real fast with the strikes. I don't think he's gotten a knockout at 155 yet, besides that bum in his last fight, Cunningham. Most of his early knockouts are at 145, but I mean, the guy starts fast. He has nasty head kicks. So 850 KO, one for Klein is not a bad stab here, but good fight there, and I'll predict Thiago Moises to win the fight as my official prediction by decision. We're moving on to the main card here in the welterweight division now, where we have Punahele Soriano taking on Miguel Baeza. Baeza is the minus 190 favorite here, while Soriano comes back as the plus 165 dog. So two pretty questionable fighters here. You know, Baeza is on a losing streak where he's had some rough losses, got knocked out 2 times, maybe even 3 times. No, yeah, 2 times. And by Chaos Williams, Andre Fiallo, 2 fights that he really probably should have won. The Ponzinibbio fight was an epic fight. Seriously, one of my favorite fights of all time there. And he's coming off a 2-year layoff. He's dealing with some injuries, but I think Baeza did the right thing, man. I mean, he dealt with the injuries. He probably trained a lot and got better over the past 2 years. He did a jiu-jitsu match a few months back where he looked solid, you know, submitted a high-level jiu-jitsu competitor. Meanwhile, Puna Soriano, man, this guy stinks. This guy is the middleweight McKinney is what I'm calling him, because he's now dropping to 170, but this guy's not a fighter. He's a finisher. I either finish you in round 1 or I lose. He doesn't figure fights out as they go on. He doesn't adapt mid-fight. He doesn't have good cardio. He doesn't have good will. He either throws a bunch of overhand lefts and kicks at you and tries to knock you out. And if he doesn't, then he melts. He absolutely melts in the second round. And he's only beaten pretty bad fighters, and I just don't like the guy at all. And I think that dropping down to 170 is interesting because there's 2 things that might be happening here. One, he might be training much more seriously and, you know, taking his cardio more seriously and just being in better overall shape to cut the weight to 170, or he might just gas out even quicker than usual with that big weight cut getting down to 170. 2 things could happen here. I lean more towards the second. I mean, if this guy, you know, slowed down and gassed out in so many of his fights, I don't see him reversing that, man. I really don't see that, you know, changing course all of a sudden into his career. You know, it's not like he's deep into his career. He went pro 7 years ago about, but I still don't see him just, you know, completely turning the tide. So, I do think this is Baeza, not looking to lay juice on him at minus 190 with the layoff, with him coming off some rough losses. I mean, losing Andre Fiallo is a bad look, guys. It's a bad look. So I'm not looking to bet Miguel at this price, but I do certainly hope the guy wins. And let's see, his odds on 2-3 are probably pretty mediocre. 450 for 2, 750, 800 for 3. I don't think that's great, but that'll be the pick, I guess. Baez around 2 KO once the bitch made Puna Soriano quits, as always. And Yeah, Puna's. I just don't like this guy, man. He was making fun of Victor Henry. He was like, Victor Henry quit when Basharat kicked him in the nuts. He's like, this guy fucking quit. Meanwhile, he literally fights with his hands on his knees when he gets tired in the middle of the fight. So, fuck that guy, and I hope Baeza knocks him out. Moving on to the Premier Division, where we have 3 of our last 5 fights in the Premier Division. Get ready for that, boys. Julian Marquez, Zach Reese. Odds for this one have Marquez minus 135, Zach Reese plus 115. Reese is a little bit of the same story as Soriano, although I can't be too harsh on the guy because he's so inexperienced. He has 7 pro fights, and they are 10 minutes combined. His longest pro fight ever was 4 minutes. So, man, I just hate... This is why the Contender Series sucks, guys. The Contender Series fucking sucks. I mean, any fighter in the world can look good when they never get out of the first round. Any fighter in the world can look good when they're given dog shit competition like Zach Reese. His Contender Series fight, he gets taken down and his opponent dives right into an armbar in the most pathetic fashion. And Dana's like, oh man, this guy's great. Let's sign him, bro. This guy sucks. He has no skill. He's just... Go out there and finish you. That's his game plan. He doesn't know whether he's going to strike or take you down. He just, let me finish this guy as quick as possible. So, no reason to believe that this guy can fight past a round. No reason to believe that he can string together a coherent game plan. And that leads me to believe that Julian Marquez is the side. Under 60%, I'm definitely taking Marquez money line at this point. Minus 130, I already have a bet on him to win 1 unit. And I think, honestly, it could be even worth a bigger bet because Marquez is not good. However, this guy knows how to adapt. He knows how to take a beating and come back. We've seen this guy lose round 1, round 2, and then come back and finish you in round 2, round 3. I mean, he is resilient. I think the guy is very sloppy and largely a bum himself, but he's still vastly more experienced, and we just know what to expect from Julian Marquez a lot more. So, if Marquez gets finished in the first round, so be it. I just believe that Reese's chances are getting overvalued at over 40% for Reese. And I think that if the fight gets into the second, third, it should be Marquez just taking over on cardio and experience. So I like Marquez money line here, and I think he finishes him probably by knockout in the second round. Enough said about that one. Premier Division as well. Bruno Ferreira taking on Dustin Stoltzfus. Odds for this one have Bruno as the favorite, minus 275. Stoltzfus coming back, plus 220. And the Fire Hydrant here, I believe, is that his no, that's not his official nickname. I think maybe Ozzy has called him that in the past. Man, a little bit of another similar story, right? This guy's been in round 2 twice. Okay, as far as I can tell, right? Yeah, he's been in round 2 twice. His all of his fights are round 1 finishes, so we don't know how this guy's cardio is going to look. He's never fought past 6 minutes, and man, it's just how confident can you be in these guys when they never fought past 6 minutes? I mean, an MMA fight is 15 minutes long. He hasn't even got close to halfway. The closest he got was 6 minutes. 6 divided by 15, 40%. He got 40% of a fight before. So, yeah, I did do the math on that fraction real quick. In case you heard a little typing going on, I did have to do that. But so how can you be almost 75% confident in Ferreira when he's never fought past 6 minutes? Is he the better striker and probably dangerous early on for Stoltzfus? Of course he is. He's the better boxer than Stoltzfus. He has power in his hands. He's even capable of hitting his own offensive takedowns, but we have no idea how his defensive grappling is going to look. We have no idea how he's going to look in the second or third round. And if Dustin Stoltzfus can absorb some punches early on here and make it into the second and third, there's a really good chance that he just takes over and grapples and drowns Ferreira in these later rounds. And that is what I'm inclined to be betting here for pre-fight Dustin 2, Dustin 3. And I think his money line before the fight is likely fine. However, if you do have live bets, I imagine Ferreira was going to put some hands on him early. I don't think Stolzfus' wrestling is good enough to the point where he's just going to easily take Bruno down. So I think Stolzfus struggles for a few minutes. He might even get knocked out. And then let's look to live bet him after that. Let's look to see how he does with the first few punches. We have seen Stolzfus get knocked out in the, Abus knocked him out in 15 seconds. Even Soriano in his last fight, landed a good hard punch that seemed to hurt him in the first minute of the fight. So just wait a few minutes, see how it's going, and then live bet Stolzfus. But before the fight, I like those Stolzfus round 2, round 3, maybe even some Stolzfus decision as well, which that is being priced at. Fight odds is kind of wacky with this fight for some reason. They have a little, 650 for Stolzfus decision. So I like 2-3 decision for Stolzfus before the fight, and then I'll be looking to get in on some money line live here. Moving on to a fight that we discussed in the past. It got canceled the day of the fight, which is Raul Rosas Jr., Ricky-Turcios. Odds for this one in the bantamweight division have Rosas minus 214, Turcios plus 184. So Rosas is going to take him down early. Turcios, his takedown defense sucks. This guy can't wrestle. He can scramble well, but he's not going to stop the initial takedown. Natividad took him down. Highstand took him down. We've seen him taken down. Did Ayman Zahabi maybe even take him down? I don't think so, but no, he didn't. But 7 takedowns for Natividad, 6 by Highstand. So we've seen him taken down 13 times in 45 minutes so far in the UFC. And those fights were just really close. Even both of his wins, they were both split decisions. I think Natividad probably deserved to win the fight. Highstand deserved to lose, but the sentiment stands. He's not winning these fights very convincingly. And Raul Rosas, I think, kind of has the same style that's going to give Turcios problems, because Turcios can't wrestle. He's not going to have the striking and the footwork to keep Rosas off him. So I think he's going to get out grappled here, especially early on where Rosas is fresh. Obviously, you have to be concerned about Rosas slowing down. He slowed down drastically in the Christian Rodriguez fight, and C-Rod took over and won the second and third rounds here. But I think Rosas is certainly winning the first round, and probably is even going to have enough to win the second round. It's probably going to be a sketchy round 3 for him, but I just don't see Ricky being able to really separate in these first rounds. They're going to be scrambles. Rosas will take him down. They're going to trade position a lot, but I think inevitably Rosas is probably going to win the first 2 rounds here and likely win a decision. But the Turcios round 3 prop is 25-1. I put a bet in on that. I think that's a great bet because we know Rosas slows down. We know Turcios has great cardio. And if it gets to that third round, there's a great chance that Rosas has already used a lot of energy at that point, and Turcios is probably going to be in the driver's seat in that point. And I think this money line is probably fine. I guess I'll go Rosas decision as my official pick. 2-1 for his odds for decision. Not amazing odds, but I think that is the outcome I will predict here officially. So wouldn't knock a bet on that myself, but only bet for me so far is Turcios round 3. Next fight, co-main event, Dominic Reyes, former title challenger, the last man to beat John Jones, taking on Dustin Jacoby. Odds for this one, Jacoby favored minus 235, Reyes coming back plus 200. So Reyes coming off of brutal losses, 3 knockouts in a row, 4 losses in a row total, except for the John Jones robbery. Everybody with a brain knows that Dominic Reyes won the first, the second, and the third round of that fight. But man, has he had a rough go of it lately, He looked just like he had AIDS versus Jan Blachowicz. Just got thoroughly outboxed and knocked out in that fight. Yuri, he rocked up, looking fine. He took it to Yuri. They had a competitive back and forth crazy fight where he inevitably got knocked out. And then he got knocked out in 80 seconds versus Ryan Spann in a bad look. That was 18 months ago. He's taken some time off, recovered, and he was supposed to fight Carlos Ulberg, and now he's fighting Dustin Jacoby, so he actually got off easy. He's getting a much easier fight. And Dustin Jacoby is just, in my opinion, not a guy who covers minus 235. That's 70%, and he's gotten a few knockouts in the UFC, right? He has 4 knockouts in the UFC. However, he has 7 decisions in the UFC, and they're all close. The Max and Grishin fight, he I'm not going to go through them all. But he either wins 29-28 or loses 29-28. So it's not like he's emphatically beating these guys 30-27. Even the weaker guys he's fought, like John Allen, McCall Olachechuk, Alonzo Menafield, those are close fights. And we just saw in his last fight that he got hurt a few times versus Menafield and lost that fight. I definitely didn't think that he would win. That was another fight where I was like, hey, I definitely think Jacoby's going to win. Minus 270, I don't think it's correct. And guess what? It wasn't correct because he got hurt a few times, and we just see that his chin isn't really up to par anymore. He's had a long career, a long kickboxing career. MMA career has been going on for about 5 years consistently at this point, but for even longer over the course of his career. I mean, he made his MMA debut over a decade ago, and man, I mean, at the age of 36, a striker who doesn't really have a great chin at 70%, who tends to win by 29-28, no way. I think it's Dom Reyes or pass, even with all the uncertainty around Dom Reyes, around him getting knocked out 3 times in a row, with him taking 18 months off. I think he's the side here, because at their best, at their peak, obviously Reyes would be favored. So this line is heavily factoring in that Reyes is slowed down or shot, and I just think they're overvaluing it a little bit. So I believe Reyes money line is the side. I like his KO line here, plus 450, KO round 1 at plus 1,000 on FanDuel. I've made both of those bets so far, and I might even end up on money line. Dominic Reyes is my side in this fight, and I hope he can get back on track. Main event time. Amazing fight between 2 studs. Love both these guys. Jared Cannonier, Nassourdine-Imavov. Odds for this one have Imavov minus 125. Cannonier coming back at plus 105. Both guys got 5-round experience. This is Imavov's 3rd main event in the UFC. I think it's Cannonier's like 6th, to be honest. He's had, I know this is, I believe, his 6th 5-round fight, but I think only maybe 5 of them are main events. But this is his 6th main event in the UFC. In 5-round fights so far, he is 4-1. Only loss being to Israel Adesanya, and he is coming off of a win over Sean Strickland, Marvin Vettori. Right off the bat, I think if you compare the first 2 fights, or these guys' fights, versus Sean Strickland, it's interesting, isn't it? We saw Imavov, it was short notice, first of all, for Imavov. It was a different opponent. However, Strickland was the one coming in on short notice, and Imavov just fought poorly there, man. I mean, he let Strickland walk him down. He let Strickland get his game plan going that we just saw against Paulo Costa, where he's walking, he's doing his teeps, he's lifting his legs. He let Strickland get in his flow, while Cannonier was a brick wall, man. He didn't let Strickland advance, and Strickland didn't even really want to advance because Cannonier was putting hands on him. I mean, Cannonier was the much harder puncher than Strickland in that fight, and I rewatched the fight overall. I tried to score it. I made a tweet about this. I don't know who the fuck won that fight. I don't know who won a single round of that fight, but watching the full 25-minute fight, I definitely feel Cannonier did more damage, implemented his game plan more effectively, and just won the fight. But on a round-to-round basis, it was weird. And now getting down to this fight, the speed of Imavov, I think, will give Cannonier trouble. I mean, this guy is really quick. His punches are quick. He mixes up the targets with his kicks really well. And I think early on, the striking diversity of Imavov and hand speed is going to win him the first round, maybe even 2 rounds. But I think as Cannonier gets more comfortable in the fight, he's going to start maybe adapting his strategy a little bit, maybe looking to mix in some clinch, where Imavov does get controlled against the fence at times. It's almost like he doesn't mind it. He's resting almost against the fence. We saw it versus Delidze, and we even saw it a little bit against Sean Strickland in their fights, where they push Imavov against the fence, and he kind of just uses it as a time to get his breath back and to charge up to win the rest of the fight. Now, I do think that could be a success, for Cannonier later on in this fight. I don't think he's going to win rounds off of it, but he might have some moments where he is getting some, clear clinch and control time in these otherwise close rounds that could sway him some of these rounds in this fight going to the decision. I think that the fight is going to go to the decision fairly confidently. Both guys are just durable. Both guys I think, know how to tailor their output to the 5 rounds. Imavov's getting more comfortable with that, and we did see him nearly knock out Dolidze in the first round, but then in the 2, 3, 4, 5, I think his tempo slowed down a good amount, probably because he was a little tired from trying to finish him, but also he realized, hey, it's a 25-minute fight. I don't want to use all my energy and then gas out potentially. So especially with Cannonier, I think this guy tempos himself really well in these 5-round fights, and he knocked out Jack Hermanson in the second round of one of his fights, but the other 4 did go the full 5 rounds and never really were in trouble of being finished. He was whooping Marvin Vettori's ass the entire time, but never really came close to stopping him in that fight. And I'll think I'm going to be cheering for Jared Cannonier to win. I love the old dog Cannonier. This guy, for being 39 years old, I think he's a phenomenal fighter. And I've been a big fan of Imavov too, but I want Jared Cannonier to win this fight. And I think the fight going the distance is the best bet of the fight. I bet it at -128 for to win 1 unit so far. And I mean, middleweight goes the distances. I did some math on it. There's been 25 5-round middleweight fights in the past 3 years, since 2021. 19 have gone the distance. There have been 5 middleweight main events this year. All 5 have gone 5 rounds. So I just think it's a pretty clear trend of these middleweights going the full 5 rounds, and there's no need to overthink it, and I do think that's the best bet of the fight. I see it being a close competitive decision. I could see either guy winning. I wouldn't be mad at either guy winning because I think they're both really fun fighters, and I'll be cheering for Cannonier, but gun to my head, I guess I'll pick Imavov to win. I envision him getting off to an early lead, and with him getting off to winning the first round or 2, I favor him to probably win 2 out of the 3 remaining rounds and win his way to a decision here. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it be a split. We know how these judges are, especially in a really untapped market like Kentucky. Who knows how it's going to look? So I like the fight to go as the distance in that one. That's my best bet of the main event. And looking forward to the card top to bottom. I'll go through the bets again. I like Cody Stamman money line, John Castaneda money line, Montana De La Rosa money line, Brad Katona by sub in the second or third, Charles Radtke money line. We'll go with Julian Marquez money line, Dustin Stolfus round 2, round 3 decision, Ricky-Turcios round 3, Dominic Reyes KO round 1. And last but not least, the main event to go the full 5 rounds. So that is going to do it this week. We are back next week with another card. I think we'll be back to the Apex next week. Yeah, we're back to the Apex for Alex Perez versus Tatsuro Taira in a fun main event. So yeah, we'll be back. We're on a streak. We had a lot of fights going on, and good to be making pods for you guys as always. Thank you all for listening. Hope you all enjoy the fights, win some bets, and I will see you all before the next UFC event next week. Peace out, everyone.